Welcome to day 2 of the MAMES 2020 Connecting the Space Between Us virtual conference and exhibit hall event. We are so excited to have you back today for this first session of the day. If you missed yesterday's sessions, you will have access to them on the conference platform through the end of October, as well as on the MAMES website after that. We are especially grateful to our sponsors for this morning's session, Allegiance Group, AccuServe, VGM, and ProChant. In session 3 of our conference, you will hear from an excellent panel of leaders in part 1 session on creating excellence in your revenue cycle processes and procedures. The focus for today will be on front office topics such as intake, prior authorizations and reauthorizations, evaluating current tracking processes, patient and referral management, as well as staff and staffing ratios. Once you are finished with this session, you'll be chomping at the bit for more, and we'll get just that with our live Q&A, as well as our part 2 session tomorrow. More on that later, but let's jump into our session with today's presenters. First, we have Amie Barone with AccuServe, Ronda Buhrmester with VGM, Bruce Gehring with Allegiance Group, Joey Graham with ProChant, and John Stalnaker with AccuServe. Let's give them a warm MAMES 2020 welcome as I hand it off to John to get us started.
All right, thanks Sarah, and thank you MAMES for having us. We're excited to do this discussion today. The first thing we want to talk about is the flow of a DME order. And to get us started, I'm going to introduce Rhonda.
So thank you, John, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As you know, we're going to talk about the front office and the back office as we get through our sessions today, but this particular one is on the front office, and this is where the flow of the DME order begins. It's quite the task to get the DME order through the whole process, which is starting with that initial setup of the patient either coming into your store, or maybe it's a call that you're receiving from a referral, or even a fax that comes in. Either way, you have that initial referral, that inbound that comes in, and then we're looking at the fax wrangler, I call it the fax wrangler, excuse me. And what is that fax wrangler going to do with that order? Is it going to go through what process? Through intake and eligibility, which would be the next steps, and intake and eligibility reviewing the data, the insurance, making sure they have those checks and balances in place before it's sent on to the next step, which is documentation. This is a key piece of the intake front office process because they're reviewing the coverage criteria. Once that order goes through that documentation process, then we get to a prior auth. Is it an insurance, a payer that requires a prior auth? And if so, what do they need for the prior auth and how long will that take? So this is still taking that order through these steps all the way into getting it scheduled and dispatched. So whether that patient's coming into your store for a setup, or if you're going into the home to do the setup, then it goes to that next step. So we're going to review all those steps and discuss it as a panel today with our experts to review that whole front end process, all the way from the beginning of that walk-in referral through scheduling and dispatching. Joe, anything you want to add here?
No, thank you, Rhonda. I think that it's really amazing to be here in front of you guys today. I really love the MAMES Association, and what we're trying to do is bring together some experts to talk to you about your revenue cycle. We decided to break this into front office and back office, and so today we're talking about front office. When we talk about front office, we're talking about pre-delivery, pre-fulfillment, right? All the stuff you do before you hand off that product to the patient or you perform the service. And so like Rhonda mentioned, hopefully what you see on the screen there looks very familiar to you. Everybody's a little bit different. You may have just one department called your CSR department, and they do all these things for you. As companies grow and scale up, they tend to kind of break out by function sometimes. And so in a large provider, there might be separate departments for every one of these things. And so we want to make sure we're talking to you guys on level ground. It doesn't matter how big you are. Regardless, all these things need to take place. And hopefully we're going to be able to provide you guys with some insights to really help you take cleaner orders, because of course the goal here and the goal of revenue cycle management is to reduce the time to payment and increase the amount of the payment, right? And so how do we do that? Well, we build clean orders that pay the first time. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks so much.
Right. And I'll in here too, because the patient pay workflow coincides and works in parallel with the flow of the DME order that Rhonda and Joey just reviewed. And this is the greatest opportunity for patient pay cash recovery, and it starts at intake. And this is when the collection of patient demographics and payment information can be collected. That's the tone for the future from the patient in getting their cash collected. And having procedures in place to confirm the responsible party's address, cell phone number, email address, and get their acknowledgement for communicating with them in this fashion via these channels does wonders for the recovery efforts and complete this whole revenue cycle workflow that we're going to be talking about. And if you're able to determine the patient's responsibility for the services or the products that are being billed, this is when you need to capture the payment guarantee, not after the fact. Even if you are estimating the cost or estimating the responsibility, this will eliminate a great deal of effort on your staff's part if they get this information up front, so they're not chasing the cash payments after the fact. And that is really critical in making it a policy that if you're going to have reoccurring charges or a rental, to establish the payment terms with the responsible party and affirm their responsibility and commitment to pay you. And this is going to solve many, many problems down the line. And with that, let's talk about responsibilities, roles and responsibilities, and Rhonda's going to lead us through that as well. Rhonda?
Thank you, Bruce. And just seeing that workflow process that you were just showing it's busy. That slide was busy, but that's the busyness of an order as it works through that front office. It's amazing when you stop and look at when you initially receive an order, how many steps it takes to get to the end result and who's touching that order. And there's a lot of people involved in that point, people, staff, departments, however you look at it. And depending on the size of your company, as Joey was talking earlier, that it all depends on the size of your company, what products you're offering, what territory you're covering, how many branches you are, how you can divide all of that up. And you have to do what's best for your company. It's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all kind of concept or model that we deal with. And I come from the experience of a small DME being hospital-based. So we were a jack of all trades. That was it's a big joke within the company I manage, but I hear that when I'm out and about with our suppliers these days, is we tend to be a jack of all trades. But when you get to maybe a certain size of a company where they have multiple branches, they're able to divide that out. So when you're looking at that front office, which is a key piece of the DME industry now, and I think you would all agree with that, is back when I was even running the DME, we looked at billing. It was all about that billing team and getting a claim submitted, getting a claim paid. Well, that's still all important. Obviously, we want to get claims submitted clean and get paid timely. We have to look at the front end and how can we do that? The front end is the key piece now because they're looking at all the documentation at that front end. And then they're also wanting to make sure that the eligibility is verified and that the patient can get that equipment. Everything you can do on the front end will save you on the back end. I always teach the members that I work with at VGM that we need to be proactive and not reactive. So if it gets to billing and it's a mess and they have to clean it up, it's almost too late sometimes, or it becomes a chore and you're losing because of the low reimbursements. It's not worth it. So we have a lot of roles and responsibilities within that front office. So when we talk front office, that's what we just went through, was getting the order through the fulfillment, or right up to that fulfillment piece. So when you're going to hear a lot of different terms, and we've provided those terms to you as a handout because we all have our different lingo that we use, but we want to make sure you're on the same page with us. So when we talk about the fax wrangler, that's that person, gathering the order, and they're trying to determine where that's going to go. You got intake and eligibility, looking at the initial documentation, making sure that they have all their check marks, and then verifying the eligibility, getting the insurance. And then they go through the documentation team, which is going to gather the documentation, review that coverage criteria depending on the payer, and making sure it's all there. And then it goes through documentation review. And that's usually that Q&A, your quality assurance team. They're making sure that it either has a green light that you can go ahead and move to the next step, or there's going to be a red light and you got to go back and gather some more documentation. And then when you get through the documentation piece, and once they give the green light, then you can get the scheduling set up with the patient, whether that's in-house or going to the patient's house. So there's a lot of steps involved with those roles and responsibilities. It just depends on what works with your company. And we'll discuss that with our panels today, is what is going to, what we've seen and what will work well with your business. I'm going to pause for a moment because I know Joey will have a few thoughts on this as well.
Thanks, Rhonda. I would guess that everybody on the call would agree that that almost every HME company, there is a war. And that war is between the back office and the front office, the billing team and the customer service team. And it's in almost every single company, right? And that's what you see there on the screen, is there's this constant tug of war between intake and billing. And the billers love nothing more than to send work back up to the front office to get things fixed, because if you don't fix your own errors, you'll never learn, right? And so it sometimes will create contention, right, between these departments. And honestly, one of the best things we've seen is where sometimes a provider will take one of their stars in the back office and plug them up front, make them like a customer service manager or an intake manager, somebody who knows the qualifications, somebody who knows what a clean order looks like, and can help impart that knowledge to the team. But that will always be there. It's there by design, actually, and it's something that you kind of want. You don't necessarily want that internal strife, but you want the two teams to keep each other on their toes, right? Certainly, you need that feedback loop from your billing team. You don't want to close that down at all. You need to know what's going wrong and how can you make those improvements with that front office team. But regardless, let's do what we can to really improve our front office and improve the processes and the procedures and the way that we've set up our team. The way providers structure their intake team varies wildly. You could have the functional setup like we talked about, where you've got fax wranglers, intake people, prior auth people, schedulers, maybe even your retail team out there in the front trying to, and by the way, one of the best things you can do is stop something from even making it into your insurance revenue cycle by going ahead and doing a cash sale or retail sale. Retail sale has a DSO of 0. So no filing claims, no fighting with insurance companies. It's really nice. So do what you can to avoid things from even entering this insurance revenue cycle. And then, of course, how you structure that can be geographically. Maybe you have branches. We talked about the functions. Sometimes by payer, you have like a Medicare team, Medicaid team. Sometimes by product, we have a complex team. We have our respiratory team. So there's a lot of different ways that we've seen providers structure that front office, and every provider is a little bit different. Like Rhonda said, it really has to do with what's your payer mix, what's your product mix, what's your size, and those things all kind of come together into kind of deciding what's the best structure for you. So I'll pass it back over to John to keep us going.
All right, thanks guys. That's great stuff, great stuff. So we want to continue the discussion with the front office, and we're going to pose a few questions to our panel. So the first question we're going to ask in the intake and processing is, how do you break up that intake team? Do you have product specialists with escalations, or what is your metric? Amie, you want to start us?
Sure. Well, I'm just going to echo pretty much what Rhonda and Joey first mentioned. It's all about the size. So the size of your company is really going to determine how you're going to break up your team members. If you have, enough orders that in one product that allows you to have specialists, then that's what you're going to do. So for instance, if you have 8 to 10 CPAPs that you get a day, that's going to allow you to have one person who can focus on those orders, work with the physicians on what is needed, and kind of, know exactly what is needed for that product. at AccuServe, we're broke up by products, right? So we've got our respiratory team, our bent metal team, and our oxygen team. And then we have specialties with maybe some negative pressures, some vents, some other things like that, that really are those high dollar ticket items that are also heavily audited. So you're going to want to make sure that you've got some support team members that can also come in and make sure that your intake team is doing what they need to do. So many of our clients set up their team members to have a support person. So what we do is we have our audit team who reviews our Medicare orders. We have them take a sampling of the team members that are doing the intake orders, so that they can ensure that those orders are being processed correctly. And by having that specialty team, you truly make sure that you can continuously re-educate. So, you know, once again, it's all about size. But also remember that if you're in one of these areas where you have CGS Connect, it's a great tool to use that lets you know that your order does qualify. And oftentimes, if you get audited, you can use that CGS Connect approval to help you through that audit process. So basically, it's going to depend on your size and any specialties that your team members have. Bruce, anything you want to add to that?
You know, from a patient pay standpoint, you know, I look at intake as triage. This is a great opportunity to determine, you know, what the patient is going to have to take responsibility for. And this is the best opportunity to have that discussion with the patient so that they are recognizing what their responsibility is going to be, and more importantly, getting them the right assistance, you know, and that means if it's a auto payment circumstance, because it's going to be a rental and it's going to be a reoccurring charge, a resupply. We know these charges are going to continue on in the future. Establish that as a part of the procedure up front and get that a secure payment. And if there's issues, that's when you're going to find out the patient's going to have a problem paying. So let's go ahead and see if they qualify for a waiver of some sort for financial you know, assistance. That's our best way to get the problem nipped in the bud, where you're going to go ahead and either have a guaranteed cash flow and guaranteed payment or not, and deal with it up front so you're not chasing it on the back end.
Yep, and I'll just add in there too, what I have learned when dealing with our members at VGM is I learn from them, and that's always, I always love that part of it. And I had one of them tell me, he said, I know within a few seconds what's going to happen with an order. And he said, the question I don't ask, what is your insurance? When I get an order, whether it's a patient or a referral calling in, I'll say, who do you expect to pay for it? And by asking that question, they know the route they have to go. And if it's going to go the insurance route, they know what steps they have to take. Or maybe the patient just wants to pay for it. Or if it's a family member, let them. Take the retail option. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But what I've also seen, you know, going to the next step of talking about the breaking up the intake team, I love when I see what I call pods. So maybe it's a respiratory pod, or maybe it's, you know, the complex rehab pod. What, you know, Joey kind of alluded on that earlier, but I love it when you have those specialists. And there's one particular group I know of that they have an oxygen pod, and it's the whole process from intake all the way through billing. They are total experts at it, and it's phenomenal what you can see with that team, what the knowledge level that they have. But they're also their backups for that. So if something were to happen with someone, whether they got sick or on vacation or what have you, that they have that pod that can rely on each other because they've been cross-trained. If you can do that, that's where I've seen success. Because then when you get through that pod, and it gets the intake pod of whatever that category is, when it gets to that billing team, it's a clean process. So I've always have seen that work really, really well. Now, if you can do that based on the size of your company, let you, or do it, I should say. Otherwise, you know, there's other options too. You can go by payer or alphabet. You know, there's different ways you can do it. So.
Great, great. All right, next question will be, so how do the parameters that you have set up to collect your patient portion of the upfront or the ongoing monthly rental collections, how does that drive your operational efficiencies? And what best practices have you put in place that impact that cash recovery?
Hey, I'll take that one, John. I think I can't emphasize this enough, and we've talked about it already a little bit about the specialization, but having clear policies and procedures set up for your product categories or your services that you're providing are critical, and letting your intake team understand and live and breathe that is really critical. But walking out that process so that your intake team knows exactly how to handle any situation that comes up and steer them the right way. And again, go back to the point that I made. You're having the conversation with them, like Rhonda said, how are you going to pay for this? Is it going to be insurance? Is it going to be a cash sale? Or, just estimating their responsibility through whatever insurance coverage they have, so that they understand there is going to be something that they're going to be responsible for, and they're going to be expected to pay for it to continue on the service with you. And I mean, boy, it's just so logical. And we do that all the time with our own household budgets. We have to pay our utilities, our cable, our phone, all that stuff. We know that we're going to have responsibility. It's no different in our industry. So it's really establishing the policies and procedures and sticking to them, so that our patient comes in and expects to pay, or is expected to pay and knows that they're going to be, asked to put a credit card down or get their bank account set up with them so that they can be debited on a monthly basis. And that's real. I can't emphasize that enough. You don't want to chase the bill if you can at all possible. I know you can't 100% of the time do that. You're gonna have people that are just gonna refuse. So you're forced with that. But if you've had that discussion, at least then you have a moral commitment from the patient that they have an obligation that they feel a little bit more, pressure to pay. And that's my 2 cents.
Well, that makes sense, Bruce. And let me jump in. I got a couple thoughts here as well. And I agree with what you just said. I think one of the most important things we can do in terms of setting up our process here at the intake side is setting that tone with the patient right up front that this is not free. Nobody walks into Walmart and says, charge me later, right? And so, not that you're Walmart, but people expect to pay right now. And I don't think this is news to anybody on the call, but the number one thing you can do right now is get that credit card on file up front. First rental or with a purchase item, unless a patient is dual eligible, Medicare, Medicaid, you need to collect some money up front, because you need to set the tone that this is not free. And even if this is a payer that you don't have fee schedules for right now, you don't really know, maybe it's some off-the-wall payer, you're really not sure what they're going to pay, you need to have a commercial payer sort of template that you use and a fixed amount that you charge as a copay. And even if that means you might have to refund it later on. This is more psychological than anything else. You have to really make sure that patient understands that they have a financial liability here. Do not let them walk away without paying a penny. Next is, remember with eligibility, the purpose of eligibility is to determine financial responsibility. That's the reason why we do eligibility, is to determine financial responsibility in terms of who's going to pay for what. Is the patient going to owe this much? The insurance is going to owe this much. And so having a really robust eligibility process is critical, especially on a rental, especially on month one of a rental. You've got to get it right on month one. So that might mean a phone call. And I hate to say that. We're all about technology here. We're all about automation here. But when somebody comes to you with a United Healthcare card, that plan, you don't know that plan. You might know that plan, but you probably don't. United Healthcare has like 10,000 different plans. And just because you think that you're in network, you don't know for sure if you're in network. Now, sometimes you can tell the network, but over time, you'll gain that. You'll be able to read that insurance card and know, okay, we know that plan. But if you don't know that plan, you need to call and find out, is this going to be covered? Are we going to be in network? Is an authorization going to be required? All those things are important because look, with these commercial payers specifically, obviously Medicare Part B, you can do an electronic eligibility, there's no problem. But with a lot of these commercial payers, there's so much nebulousness that initial intake, doing a phone eligibility and really getting it right, ongoing, just run the electronics to make sure they still have it. But make sure you've really checked that eligibility up front well. And then just a couple other things, you need to program coverage limits into your billing system. Coverage limits are going to stop you from over dispensing. They've already received the mask in the last 3 months, that sort of thing. Your system should be telling people, hey, dummy proof your system. I'm not calling your people dummies, but we have to give our people triggers and cues in our billing system because they don't know. And so if the patient just came in and got a mask last week, the last thing we want to do is ship them one today, right? We need to check same and similar when possible. Obviously, that's critical that we have a process to check that same and similar before we dispense the product. And then finally, if this is a hospital discharge, get the discharge date. Do your very best to get that discharge date because that is critical that you know the discharge date so you can avoid inpatient-related denials. So those are a couple thoughts I have on this one.
Joey, and I'll just add to that a little bit. So oftentimes that patient portion is going to be your profitability on that equipment. So it's incredibly important to determine whether you're going to wait to get that money after or whether you're going to collect that money up front. I couldn't stress enough what Bruce and Joey both said about start the conversation immediately. As Bruce said, it's logical. It's just logical. We all owe money every time we go somewhere. Why should we not be paid as well? So if you start to put cost associated with, your delivery drivers, your intake people, your billing companies, all of those things, that 20% is going to add up and it's going to become critical for you to collect. The other thing is it takes sometimes a really special person to be able to ask for money. So I think when you're working with your staff members, it's great to have some scripts maybe. Obviously, you're going to have to go off the script at times because you're going to get questions and things like that, but it takes a special person to ask for money. So I know that all of our clients give a lot of training and education on the way to word things, rebuttals when necessary. So those are just some extra things that I think are really important. And another thing, just to share with you guys, we have clients that ask for 2 credit cards up front. So when that first one declines, they've got a backup. And then we also have clients that get a credit card even when a secondary is Medicaid. And they do that because of plan hoppers. And they do that because who knows how long that insurance is really going to be in place. So there's all these different things that you should really think about that down the road can affect you collecting that money or not.
Thanks, guys. That's all good stuff. Next question. So how does the complexities of the requirements delay dispensing of the products, and what are some of the requirements that are not identified clearly or explained in the LCDs? Rhonda, you want to field that grounder?
Oh, sure, I'll take that one, thanks. A lot of us complain about Medicare, but I can tell you the one great thing about Medicare is we have an LCD, right? We know where to go to see what the coverage criteria is. That's outlined for us. Now it's up for interpretation, I get it. We can have 10 people read a policy, we're gonna have 10 different interpretations, but we at least have something to refer to. A lot of these other payers outside of Medicare, that's the challenge of finding what their coverage criteria is. Some of them have an LCD, but they have a policy book for DME, they have policy requirements. So you can refer to those if they have it, and you should push to look for that. When you're negotiating those contracts with these other payers, ask those questions. It's not just about the fee schedule, and that's where I find some faults when I talk to suppliers, in the sense that when they start getting these post-pay audits with these other payers, their initial response is, well, we didn't know what the policy was. Well, you should know that when you're negotiating your contracts along with the fee schedule. Tell me what the coverage criteria is. Where can I find it? But outside of that, even finding some of those complexities that we're looking at, there's a lot of questions that I receive that someone will say, well, the LCD doesn't say that I need a respiratory therapist. Well, that's not up to the LCD. That's just the coverage criteria. That goes to your state laws, or maybe it's in the quality assurance guidelines, that kind of what your accreditation mimic when you go to the quality standards. So there's other criteria that's out there that we need to make sure that as a company, as a whole, that we're following, that's not identified. What I did as a DME supplier prior to VGM days, because these other payers struggled providing me with a policy to say this is what I need for an oxygen patient or a CPAP patient or a bent metal patient, we followed Medicare policy for every payer. What we found was the efficiency that increased because our staff wasn't going from, okay, this payer requires these guidelines, or this, we're not sure about this payer, and maybe Medicare has this and Medicaid has this. There was just so much inefficiency when we did that as a DME supplier. We said, let's follow Medicare standards for everybody based on the coverage criteria. And it worked, because more than likely we're going to have more than what we need when it comes to a payer outside of Medicare. And that's fine. And what you tell your referral sources are, we follow, or this is our company policy. You don't want to say we follow Medicare policy, because they'll come back to you and say, well, this is not a Medicare patient, right? So you want to say that our company policy is that we collect this information, and that's what you need to do. And remember that everything that you collect up front will save you on the back end on working an audit. We don't want to have to play a reactive game at the end of this to chase things down. You have to get everything you can up front. Once that's out of the physician's eye or mindset, they send you that referral and they've moved on, they're done, they're out of it, right? So you have to get everything you can up front and know what those requirements are. So there's a lot of options for a supplier out there as far as keeping a library of coverage criteria to say this is what we do for this type of referral, whether it's oxygen or a wheelchair. You have that coverage criteria identified for your staff, and they know how to find that and go to that as a resource. So you want to empower them to do that. So I know I threw a lot out there, but I'll pause and let someone else chime in, because I know Amie and Joey's got some thoughts with that.
Yeah, Rhonda. So I agree 100% with what you said. It's very important to know your medical policies. Every payer has medical policy, right? So you have to do that research when you're taking an order. When all else fails, follow Medicare, because more than likely you're going to definitely have more than what you need. I think the complexity really comes in with everyone understanding policies different. So having a robust training department who can help guide your team members on what is needed and what is acceptable, what we will allow, what we will not allow, what we're going to ask additional documentation for, I think is very, very important. And then having one message back to the physician. So the complexity comes also where the physician does not understand what is required or why it's required. So we've got Dear Physician letters, we've got LCDs, we've got many things that we can do to help educate the physicians. And we have created standard wording. So every time we communicate with a physician, we say the same exact thing and maybe just tweak it just a little bit, maybe with a date or with, removing something, but it's about that consistency, constantly telling them the same things repeatedly, so there's not mixed messages. And, when you do have these maybe like oddball payers where every once in a blue moon, you get an order for a certain payer, following Medicare guidelines and explaining to the physician that, we're trying to work with the payer to see what exactly is required, but here's what we know will get the patient the equipment. And always flipping that around and making it about the patient and not really about you getting paid, really about the patient. Joey, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think that complex requirements is really a hallmark of this industry. It's one of the barriers to entry. It's why that's why all your neighbors aren't opening up HME companies. At least that's one of them. Complex requirements that's our world. That's what makes us special. When we work with the rest of healthcare, they they go, oh my gosh, HME, because they know that our requirements are nutty. So I love what Rhonda said. It's so much more than just the LCD. Even in Medicare world, you've got, the NCD, which is above it, and then you've got policy articles, which are below the LCD, and there's even more. Like right now, we're in a public health emergency, and that has its own special set of requirements. But it's not just that; it's your state board of pharmacy, and it's also your accreditation. All these things are playing into this complexity, and it is an extremely complex industry to be a player in. Absolutely. One quick note about the accreditation. Remember, you have to remember that you wrote your policies or procedures, and the accreditor is holding you accountable for the policies and procedures you wrote for yourself. So you sometimes will have given yourself overly burdensome requirements, and sometimes you may want to go back to those policies and procedures you've written and say, do we really need to do that much? Does it really need to be this complicated? Do we really need to keep all these logs? I'll be quiet, but I think that that's something that we could all look at to kind of simplify our world a little bit, because sometimes those were written, a decade ago, right? So anyways, the other thing I want to mention here is it's almost impossible for your people to be an expert in every single payer and every single product. Just about impossible, if not impossible. I talked to a provider the other day who told me that their learning curve to bring a new intake rep up to speed is 6 months. 6 months before somebody is up to speed fully and productive in their intake department. And that's extreme, but that also is indicative. I would guess nobody on this call could say it's less than 30 days. It's incredibly intensive to get somebody up to speed in intake. And what we need to do to flatten that learning curve is evolve our billing and workflow system. And what I mean is right now we do things like, track the status of the order. We may check certain fields to make sure they're populated, but we're not guiding our team down the path. We haven't provided them with decision support. And that's what I mean by evolve. You need to evolve your billing and workflow system to be a decision support system so that you have baked the requirements into the system. When you kick off a Medicare CPAP workflow, the system guides the reps through that workflow. It helps them understand the requirements. It tells them where to check for the AHI and things like that. It lets them know they need to make sure they have a sleep study, and it really flattens that learning curve for a new intake rep. So evolving your workflows and really documenting the requirements and baking that into your workflow system and your billing system is really the next level to help you bring in people quicker and reduce those errors.
Yep. Thanks, Joey. So a repeatable, quantifiable process for efficiencies, right? All right, so how about checking companies with checking insurances like Blue Cross Blue Shield for same and similar with the long phone waits and the hold times? Are they doing this themselves or are they outsourcing this?
I'll jump in right there. I think when our team hears Blue Cross Blue Shield, we just sigh, right? Because Blue Cross Blue Shield is going to be a long phone call, and you're probably going to be transferred at least twice. So it's just nutty. The Blue Cross system in general, we could have a whole conversation about it. But when it comes to this, sometimes you have to get on the phone. There's no other way. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to do a phone eligibility to really understand the coverage and to understand if you are in network. And so you've got two choices. You're either going to insource it or you're going to outsource it. Many companies are outsourcing, and I would say almost all the large players in our industry are not only outsourcing, but they're offshoring because you want to get low-cost labor sitting there on hold for you. What you can do, though, is build a database internally of requirements, and that way you can sometimes skip the phone call. Like if you understand the plan and you understand its requirements, then you may not need to make that phone call. But that evolves over time. The bottom line is until technology catches up, this is a manual and labor-intensive process for all providers. Now, technology does exist to lessen the burden. There's been major advances in robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. For instance, we have a phone system that will sit on hold, and then once the call gets answered, it gets transferred to a live rep. So you don't have somebody sitting there for 10 minutes listening to hold music. That technology is catching up. So, we could actually hire a bot to sit there and listen to the hold music for us instead of having a live person do it. So there are some opportunities out there, But, like I said, until we get some better technology, especially from the commercial payers, when it comes to things like same and similar, there's nothing that you can do but make a phone call.
I think Rhonda's muted. Maybe I can't hear.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes. I would agree with you, Joey. That's a tough one to capture with the same and similar, especially that is suppliers are struggling to find the best method to do that particular process. Obviously, if you can do it online, if they have some kind of IVR type system set up, obviously that's what you're going to do, or you're going to have to do those dreaded phone calls and have that person going through that process. It is a mix. I hear a mix of suppliers as far as how they're handling that part of it. And as Joey mentioned, it depends on the size of the company. So yes, the larger companies tend to outsource that. Some of the smaller companies, obviously they're going to keep that in-house, and they have their staff doing that particular process. But it is getting, it's advancing more and more. But, one thing I'll add too is even during the current environment that we are in, and I don't want to dwell on that, but I have heard suppliers say it's even worse now than what it used to be. And I don't know if it's because of the volume that these payers are getting for calls, or if they have a lighter workload, maybe they've had to furlough. I'm not sure what's going on with them on that end, but I've heard there's been more of a challenge trying to get through to the payers.
All right, thanks, Rhonda. Let's move on to referrals. So let's talk through some referral questions. So what is the best process to receive referrals? And is there any way, or do you automate? Amie?
So the best way to receive the referral is through your billing software. So when the referral comes in, it can automatically be reviewed by, as Rhonda calls, the fax wrangler. So that fax wrangler can then dictate where that order is going to go. So all the physicians have a fax number, right? So as long as you have that fax number set up to come into your system, it can go through your workflow. Any walk-in patients that come in, you're going to want to make sure that you fax that into your system and it goes through your standard workflow. Keep things consistent for your team members. Don't make them have to go to a manual fax machine to help a patient up front, to then go to check their workflow inside of a billing software. All these different things lead to errors, lead to orders being missed. Automation. So automation is something very, very important to all of us, right? Because we want to reduce the number of touches. We want to figure out what can we automate that we don't have to have a person touch, that's cost effective, saves us money, and it's consistent. So we have a system called CallFire that we send out to anytime we get a referral, and that we enter that referral into the system. We have an automated call that goes out to the patient to let them know that we have received their order from their physician for their durable medical equipment. And we have found great success with this automated call. We do it within 24 hours so that the patient gets an immediate response, knowing that their order is being worked on. We do let them know we're working with the physician and their insurance company, and that within 48 hours we'll have some follow-up for them. So our goal is to deliver within 48 hours, but at least the patient we got a little bit of a window there just in case things don't go as perfectly as we hope. The other thing that we do is we automate a fax back to the physician to let the physician know, hey, we got your order and we're working on it. And rest assured, we may need some additional documentation from you. If so, we'll be in contact. But it's just a quick automation to let the physician know we've got it, we're working on it. And we try to keep that fax standard with the way all of our other faxes are going to look to our physician, so that when they get that physician, they know, or excuse me, when they get that fax, they know exactly who it's from, what we're looking for, and all the wording is consistent. So I think the best process for referrals is any type of automation that you can do and keeping it consistent for your team members. Joey, anything you want to add there?
Sure, that was all really good, Amie, and that's a really cool system you guys have developed. We're a big fan of what you just said. The setting up a pre-intake position that we call fax wrangler. And that person is like your air traffic controller, you know? They're helping to land the planes, they're helping to get them to take off. And what that means is you're gonna have all these orders coming in from all these different sources. You know, Amie mentioned it could be a fax that's coming in, it could be a walk-in order, it could be an e-referral that's coming in through Parachute or, you know, Curispan or, you know, Allscripts. There's all these different e-referral services as well. And so all this, it may even be an email that comes in. So all these different sources have to feed into one bucket. And I love what Amie said. If you have determined that that bucket is my billing system and that it's a fax, then everything needs to come in through that channel, which means that the other channels, you set yourself up so you can fax into that channel and create that pool of referrals right there in your billing system and your workflow system. The other thing is with automation. I mean, there's a few opportunities for automation here. You know, you have the data entry piece itself, which can be automated. A lot of times those e-referral services, especially like the integrated Brightree e-referrals, that'll pop the patient right into your system. You don't have to do that data entry yourself. Eligibility, electronic eligibility can also be automated. Order routing can be automated. And so this is kind of cool. I've seen where providers have set up this air traffic controller position, this fax wrangler position, where when an order comes in and they're building out that workflow, they tag it with payer, product, referral, boom, the order routes itself to the right team. Because like Rhonda said, they have pods and they want to route it to the right pod. And we don't need people to sit there and try and figure out which pod it is. We want the system to do that for us. And I love what you said also, Amie, about the acknowledgement. I think there's 3 acknowledgements that are needed when you get a new order. There's one back to the physician saying, thank you for the order. There's another one to the patient saying, hey, we got your order, we're working on it. There's a third one to the sales rep. Got to let the sales rep know we got this order so the sales rep can kind of be on it. Sometimes they can be John in the spot, help you get any of that documentation you might be missing. And they love to use that as an opportunity to call a referral and say thank you. So, that's all I wanted to add there. I'll toss it back to you, John.
All right, thanks, Joey. And right along that same line, let's talk about how do you track referrals in your software system, and then how are you using that data for future sales? Joey, you touched on it just a minute. Are your salespeople, do they run a report and do they use that? Do they track the number of inbound referrals by product? Joey?
Yeah. So the most important thing is that when a referral comes in, it gets logged right away. That's so important because you lose all this information when you don't do that. So as soon as an order comes in, a new order, and that fax wrangler gets it, the way they create that workflow is they generally have to create a skeleton patient and a skeleton order. And then they tie those documents to that skeleton order, and they queue that order up to the next phase of the process, which should be that intake and eligibility we just talked about. So making sure every single referral is entered into your billing and workflow system immediately upon receipt. And then, then we can, notify the sales rep immediately that we've got this order, and it's preferably via like a text message, like an SMS, because that way they get it right there on their phone. They don't have to sit there and watch their email all day to see new referrals coming in. There's a lot you can do with reporting once every order has been logged, and that's really up to you and your billing system and the way you're set up. I personally prefer a weekly reporting cadence as opposed to monthly. I really like weekly, a weekly scorecard. And what I like to do is set up my billing system so that my reps are tied to my referrals. That relationship exists in the billing system, so I can easily spit out reports. And what I would do is spit out a report for each rep with all their referrals, and I want to give them a weekly scorecard with all their referrals with trending, so they can actually see when referrals are dropping off from a certain rep, when they're picking up with a new referral. Gives them all that visibility. And do they know why referrals fell off with our #1 referral source? Hopefully, maybe they're on vacation or something, or if not, then there might be some trouble. So those are the 2 things I would really add there is, making sure that you log every single referral and that you maybe look at like a weekly reporting cadence for your reps. I wouldn't ask them to run it. I would send them that report. I would automate that report, have it show up in their inbox every Monday. So Rhonda, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I do. And I'll just add, I like what you had said about making sure that it's entered in right away when they receive a referral, and it's a complete panel. it's complete detailed data of that referral. It's just not basic information. So we've captured everything that we need, with their name and where they're from and whatnot. And then I like that idea of how it gets to that sales team outside. So making sure that they know that a referral is received. So they also know that if the intake team needs help getting any of the data, that they are aware of what's going on. One step I'd even like to add to that is sometimes I feel like we lack notifying the referral that yes, we got this, and thank you, like acknowledging that order that we received or the documentation for that referral that we received, and how you're handling that patient. You have to think about from their point of view, when they send over the information to us, they're assuming we're just taking care of it all, right? Well, if there's any issues along the way, we need to let them know so that they're in the loop and they know how the patient's doing with that product. So if they've gotten their oxygen, or if they've gotten their respiratory equipment, whatever it may be, that we're letting the referral know what's going on with that patient. Because maybe the patient comes to us and says, I can't come to you right now, or I can't do this right now, and it might be a few days. In the meantime, that referral's thinking, well, the patient's already getting their equipment. They have no clue. So the acknowledgement on that end is very important. I know we were talking about tracking, but I just feel like that's one important issue, or one important thing that we need to make sure that we're notifying those referrals of the acknowledgement of that order. Did you have anything, Amy?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Totally agree that every order that comes in needs to be tracked. Tracking every order provides so much information for your company. One of the very important things is when an order comes in, you have a create date. So you know when that order was created or that patient was created, and then you can start to average the number of days it's taken you to get that documentation, to be able to know which physicians are your best referrals. So if I create an order today and I don't confirm that order, I don't deliver that equipment for 10 days, it's more than likely I'm working back and forth with that physician for documentation, or I haven't sent it to scheduling for 10 days because I'm going back and forth with that physician to get the necessary documentation. So I think tracking every single order that comes in lets you know many different things. The other thing that it can do is we create very, very specific void reasons for our orders. So if I'm getting a whole bunch of great orders, I'm so excited that I'm getting all these CPAP orders, but 50% of them are getting voided because the patient refused the equipment or the patient was out of network. Those are communications I can start having back with the physician to say, hey, we're out of network with this payer, so we've got to have conversations with the patients. Or hey, does your patient really want this equipment? Do you have the conversation with them? Because we're 50% of the time we're voiding the orders. So now we've got really good data that we can go back to the physicians and talk with them about what's really happening with the referrals. So I think oftentimes we see with our clients that they think this is just a great referral source, and then really quantifying, hey, do you know how many times we have to go back and forth for documentation, or do you know how many orders that we void? Is great information for your sales reps. And then we also can provide, here's the training that each physician needs. Here's the the things that they're always missing. So I think those are really important things too. The other thing by tracking your void reasons is it lets you know how many referrals you're turning down because you're out of network with a payer. So if I turn away 5 orders this month because I'm non-contracted with UHC, well, I might want to get contracted with UHC, or maybe do a subcontracting agreement with somebody who is a contract with UHC. So a lot of different things tracking every single order can tell you. John?
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Let's move on. Let's talk about prior authorizations and reauthorizations. Let's the first question I want to talk about is, what are some of the best practices for tracking insurances that need an authorization, and how do you manage those authorizations for the payers, and what's not consistent with the requiring of the PAR, and what processes do you follow to eliminate multiple touches and get more efficient? Joey?
I can jump in, John. Yeah, I can do that first one. This is a deep question. It's a heavy question. You've got to set up your billing system for one thing. That's the most important thing. Set up your billing system appropriately so that you have payers that require authorizations, which means you've set up your price tables as well. You will come across payers that they're either par or non-par, right? And that could mean that you need to set up the payer more than once. You really should. So let's say United Healthcare, for example, you may have a par and a non-par UHC set up in your system. And when you run that eligibility, one of your goals is to determine which one do I need to pick for this particular payer or for this particular order that I'm working on. You want to know your payers and set up a knowledge base, for your employees to reference. That's really important. I talked about decision support earlier, but as you're working towards that evolution, what you really have to build out is a robust set of documentation that your team can reference. Again, you can't expect everyone to remember everything. So you need to build out that documentation for them and really squeeze the brains of those people who've been in your team forever and try to get that tribal knowledge out and on paper, and then store it somewhere that's easily accessible by your team. A lot of providers are using Google Drive or Microsoft Office 365, like SharePoint or OneDrive, where you've got some nice indexing and search features. You can go in and find the right document, find the right article, or you actually build out a knowledge base and a series of articles and knowledge articles. Some providers have gone that far as well. But that's it, right? You got to make sure that you kind of bake this information in. You don't want to expect that your team is just going to remember it. You want to communicate with your patients that a par is pending, especially in the case where if you have to dispense the product pre-par, for example, it's hospital discharge or something that has to be set up today, we can't possibly wait, then you need to make sure that you set that tone right there with the patient, that there is a pending authorization, their insurance may or may not approve it, and if not, then there's going to be financial responsibility on their part, or they're going to have to return the equipment. So, I've even seen providers have a special form or acknowledgement they have the patient sign in that scenario to really just kind of make a big deal out of the fact that there's a pending auth. Because really, you shouldn't dispense if you don't have an authorization on file. So I'll pass it over to you, Amie. I'm sure you got some more to add there.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. Spot on. One of the most important things, as Joey mentioned, is like a library, a base. Creating a matrix for maybe your group numbers. So knowing that if you do have United Healthcare, you have Anthem, these are the group numbers that require a par. So it helps that intake team really know, okay, this has to flow over to this direction. It has to go to our par team if you broke up that way. So really knowing it's all about knowing your payers. You've got to know your payers and what their requirements are, and that then helps you know which workflow you're going to go. So setting up the system, as Joey said, first and foremost, you can't expect your intake members to know everything. So let the system guide them on what they need to do. Create your matrices so that you know by your group numbers what requires a par, what group numbers require a par, so that makes intake so much easier. And then eliminating touches. So that's a hard one because you have every system's a little bit different, right? So you know that today, if I requested a par for AIM, I'm going to get it right away. So there's no follow-up there. But if I request a par for maybe Blue Cross Blue Shield, not going through AIM, I might have to wait 30 days. So the follow-up to that, if I have to wait 30 days, I'm going to check at day 31 for that par. I'm not going to check before that because what's the point? So creating workflow that allows you to standardize your follow-up days according to either product or by payer is very important. Some of the softwares do allow that to happen. In some of the softwares you have tasks that you could follow up on. You've got workflow. You've got sometimes you even have to go outside of the system to set it up if that system's not going to work for you. So really that creating the workflow so that you don't have to touch things repeatedly is critical, and then setting up the system to let you know what is needed. Rhonda, anything you want to add?
Sorry, I was muted again. You guys did a great job covering it, and one key thing that you had even mentioned, Amie, was knowing your payers, and I feel like that's something that we could learn from in the DME industry is knowing our payers. And a lot of the phone calls I get are all about that, that fee schedule. While that's important, you have to know your payer outside of that and knowing that timeline. So if the prior auth is going to take a few days, that not only the patient is aware, but the physician, the referral is aware. But you guys, both Joey and Amie, both covered it really well, so thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right, so how about, you've said a lot of stuff about setting up your software system correctly. So in this PAR, do you have one person managing the auths, and what reports would that person use inside of these software systems? Amie?
Well, I think that's going to depend on, the volume of PARs that you have. So if you're a smaller company, you might just be able to have one, but you could be a smaller company that has a tremendous amount of Medicaid, and that Medicaid may require you to have multiple people. So you could be a little bit heavy on the PAR side, even being a smaller company. I think it also depends on what access do you have. Do you have access to Epic, where you can go pull documentation? Is the person who gets the PAR the person who also has to obtain the documentation for that PAR, or do you have your system holding for documentation and then a PAR? So I think that's a pretty broad question, because it's all going to depend on your size and your payer mix and understanding your payer. It also depends on where you're set up to require that PAR. So like AIM, you cannot get a PAR for until 3 days in advance. So you're not going to check that before 3 days in advance. So you've got to kind of look to see how many PARs are expiring, how many new orders are coming in, to know the volume and how much each person can get through. So doing time studies to know what's the amount of work one person can do are all critical things that you have to do. Joey, anything you want to add?
Yeah, that's really good. Like you said, it has to do with the volumes, and really, most providers, I would say the intake person is also the person who's chasing down the initial authorization. Usually the intake person is responsible for that order up until the point that it gets sent over to be scheduled and dispatched. Although certain large providers do have a whole separate prior auth team that does nothing but this, so it really depends. But when you get to the back end of the process and you look at renewals, PAR renewals, I am definitely a proponent of having a PAR renewal team. I am not a fan at all of having your upfront, your intake team being responsible for renewals, because they just, new orders, new discharges always take precedent. And so they will always get backlogged on their renewals. You want people dedicated to renewals. So I'm a big fan of that. But in initial authorizations, I'm sure, you can let the intake team do that. A lot of times that's what makes the most sense. And, for tracking, especially if you're using a system like Brightree, PAR tasks is a great thing that you can track. When a PAR task is created, when a PAR task is followed up on, when a PAR task is closed out, you can report on all those things. And so you can create some nice production reports just on PAR tasks as an example. And if not, you could find some other object in your database to do the same thing with, even a note. So you can, you kind of can set up your system. And like Amie said, it's all about the way you've configured yourself and have you thought through the way you're going to set fields and the reports you'll be able to get out once you've set the fields a certain way.
Excellent.
I'll hand it back over to you, John.
Excellent. Well, so it sounds to me like as far as your PARs go, it's very important to have your system set up correctly, know your own data, and pay attention to the workload of each of your employees, and they have a good understanding what they're doing. But let's elaborate a little bit more on the renewals. What kind of proactive approach can you use for those renewal authorizations so that there's no gap in service? Amie?
Well, you're going to want to run, the most important thing for you to do is to work your PARs prior to them expiring. So you want to make sure that there is no break in that need for the PAR. So working the expiring is going to be more important than immediately working the expired. So also it's important to keep in mind that there's many payers that have a continuous rental. So if you give the equipment out in January, you only have until October if it's a 10-month rental to get paid. You can't add rental periods onto the end. You are stuck within that 10 months to get that equipment paid in full. So working your PAR expirings are critical. Oftentimes, clients come with very large hold projects, and we see all of this expired revenue, and what do we do with this expired revenue? But you got to stop the bleeding. So you have to work those parts expiring while trying to ensure that you don't have all of these expired parts that are going to hit timely. We are pretty fortunate in the rental business that we are able to add rentals on to the end of most of our cycles. But like I said, a lot of these state Medicaids, it's a continuous rental and you can't do that. Once again, you have to know your payers. You have to know what each payer is willing to do. Oftentimes you'll see a large backlog too with some of the payers where you might not be able to get a PAR for 30, 60, 90 days. And that can then, push everything back. I think that's about it. Joey, want to add to that?
Well, I think you covered it really well, Amy. And the real gold nugget there is, if you're waiting for it to be on your hold report, then you've waited too long. That's not proactive. You have to proactively work them before they hit the hold report, right? And you kind of bake some of that knowledge in, like Amy said, you know how long it takes to get these authorizations. So you kind of know how soon in advance you need to start working on them to get it in place before it expires. And then, like I said, having a dedicated team, or at least people who have this on their job responsibility, carved out, dedicated time to get it done, is so critical. Otherwise, it will go to the bottom of the pile, and it will backlog, and then it'll become expired, and it's even a whole bigger issue.
Yeah. Ronda, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Amy and Joey did a great job covering that part of it. I really don't have anything to add, but thank you.
Let's move on to scheduling and dispatch. So what software are people using to do this function? Joey?
I can jump in there. Yeah. There's I've seen a lot of different systems in place, everything from Outlook and Google Calendar, which are not bad options, by the way. They have some really nice features in both of those softwares. I mean, they're dedicated calendar systems. The problem is they're not integrated with your billing system, right? Then you have providers who use the inbuilt features within the billing system. Brightree has a scheduling function. In fact, HDMS just last year came out with a really nice calendaring scheduling function for their system. So that stuff exists out there, and some providers even use third-party specialty applications that are just for this, because those might have features like appointment reminders that the billing systems just don't have right now. I've even seen systems or health providers use other EMRs within the health system for this because they have more features. I've seen like Advanced MD as an example, or Athena being used, whereas, the DME billing system houses the workflow and stuff. They're using this calendar because it has these other features like, self-service portal and automated reminders and stuff, the ability to track clinicians and rooms and all that stuff. So it really is all over the board. And honestly, when we get into the larger Q&A, I'd love to open up this question and see what some other providers say they're using for this function.
Absolutely.
Ronda, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you talked about what they're using to schedule, but even to dispatch, we've seen great tools there with, Brightree having their Apacheta or the iPads that other suppliers are using. I feel like that's another great tool to use when we get to the dispatching and actual delivery of it, obviously. But I love that whole electronic process because it makes things more accessible and more efficient. But definitely making sure that you're using a platform that's user-friendly for your company and for your billing systems, for your team, and that it can communicate amongst each other. And I'm interested to hear what other platforms are out there as well, because I know there's a lot. It's just a matter of finding what ones are good and have the good functionality.
Great. Yeah, we'll get a lot of those questions answered when we turn it over to our guest. Let's talk timeframes. What kind of timeframes for setting up each patient for your clinician per product line? Joey?
I can talk a little bigger picture, and hopefully Rhonda's got some better answers than I do. But really, my perspective is timeframes can vary wildly. Obviously, we want to set up each patient as soon as possible, but we want to follow our process, So, I mean, first off, is this a discharge or a stat order? That's going to play into maybe there's going to be some rules relaxed if that's the case, or if it's from a certain referral source that will allow us to be a little more flexible, get them set up a little more quickly. You know, there's other things like prior authorization requirements, availability of documentation, and then even your own scheduling ability. You know, a lot of you have RTs, for instance, that go around to your branches, and they might be in a branch 2 days a week, and they're booked up for the next 2 weeks. So you might want to set up this CPAP as soon as possible, but you realistically can't for 3 weeks. Unless you do something else, unless you send out a different rep, or you have that RT go do a home visit, or have them come in another day. You know, you can kind of sometimes play with that, but generally you might have your own constraints that stop you from being able to fill as quickly as you want. But obviously you want to get each order set up as soon as possible, and you want to follow your process and ensure that you're set up to get paid before you dispense your product. Because you have to remember, and I'm going to leave you on this note, your only leverage with your patient is your product or service. That is your only leverage. And the moment you have released it to them, you just lost all your leverage. So make sure you get that payment up front, you get that credit card on file before you release the product or service.
Absolutely, Joey.
Rhonda, yeah, I'm sure you got some more. Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Is that just what you had just said, the leverage that you have with the patients, that we have, you know, our mindsets have had to change over the course of many years. You know, back when I was a supplier, I mean, we didn't always look at it from that perspective, but times have changed because of the way the rates have decreased, and also the increase in the audit perspective. And it's not just Medicare that does these audits, it's other payers that do post-pay audits. But, you know, it's getting into the timeframes of these patients for your clinicians. I'm a clinician by trade, and we would always allow, like if it's a CPAP or a ventilator type patient, it was an hour. And if you're going to the home, you have to always allow for that travel time. We even got into group setups, and I know that we're in different times now, but we were doing group setups. I saw suppliers do that with group setups in their own office, and they, depending on the size of the company and the space they had available, they would do group setups, you know, for CPAP, and that was I thought that was pretty cool. I think some are still trying that now, even with the pandemic, but mostly it's virtual. That's, you know, that's changed our whole logic too. As far as this pandemic, we do a lot of virtual setups. So we maybe do a drop ship of a product. Even, I mean, I've heard of many products being drop shipped, but then we schedule that virtual call to do the actual education and setup, if you want to call it. But it really does depend on the product as far as the time frames and the referral source. So if it's, you know, like Joey said, it's a hospital discharge, a lot of times that's same day or within a 24-hour period. And that's how it's translated through this whole front end office is, you know, this is a stat order, if you want to call it a stat order for oxygen. But if it's a hospital bed or a wheelchair, it may not be the same day. It may be, you know, the next day, depending on when you get your documentation. Because again, as Joey alluded to, that is your leverage. Once it's out, as you all know, into that patient's home, that's gone. And good luck getting the information you need. So that is another question I'm really interested in hearing some responses to when we do open it up for our live discussion.
All right.
Yeah. So John, I just wanted to add real quick, because Joey had made a comment about when it takes 3 weeks to get something scheduled. So if that happens, make sure you check insurance eligibility again, because if that rental, if now you've checked outside of the month, very likely that patient could have switched insurances. So make sure you go back through your insurance eligibility process and re-verify that insurance.
That's a great point, Amy.
That's a great point. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, well, that's going to conclude our session, our portion of this session. Hopefully with the topics we've discussed have spurred lots of questions from you guys, and our expert panel here can answer them for you. So thanks, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Awesome, everyone. That was so good. So we have a lot of great questions. So Joey, I'm going to hand it over to you right away. If you can get us started with some of those, as I know you were tracking through the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's very exciting to be here, guys. Thank you so much for having us. A lot of great questions have come through. So what I've been trying to do is type those into the general chat so you guys can see them. And because what's really important, you know, we had planned this pre-COVID. We had planned to do this big in-person whole day session with you guys. And this front office would have been half of it, the first half of the day. And then we were going to do the second half of the day with the back office. and it was going to be really interactive. Like that was our whole goal, is to get out there, talk to you guys, get you talking to each other, sharing ideas among each other. And so that's what's really important to us going into this, is that you guys have the opportunity to communicate with one another and share your own ideas, and that we can kind of repeat those if they come through the chat to us. So, you know, I put in some of those messages there into the chat. Hopefully go in there and read it. I got 4 questions so far. We just got another one in. I'll put it in. But Amie, I know you had put in some information about software, especially about the faxing and the response fax back to the physician. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. The question was, what software do we use to fax back the physician? And we use the billing software. So most billing softwares are going to have the opportunity for you to fax from the system. So we have created custom fax templates to be able to fax out. Also systems like RingCentral. I know we have RingCentral in-house that we use, but other software systems also can help you do that if for some reason your billing system doesn't allow you to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got a lot of good questions coming in here. You know, about that, the question about what do you use for scheduling and dispatch? Somebody wrote in that they're using Apacheta. Apacheta is the software that's incorporated with Brightree. I think that they're actually owned by Brightree now, and they're part of that whole ecosystem. So whatever your billing software, each one of them has generally its own built-in mobile delivery platform. And I think they all have it at this point, pretty much. So you really want to work with your vendor. And there are also like enterprise level solutions like UPS WorldShip, I think is one of them, where you can actually have fleet management and really go to the next level with it. Does anybody on the panel want to share anything else about scheduling or dispatch? Doesn't look like it. That's okay. Good. Well, we had a few other questions. Does anybody on the panel want to jump in and tackle any of those questions that have come in? We got, are you on your credit card authorization form? Are you including a clause on damaged rental equipment and non-compliant PAP patients? I would say generally yes. I'm curious what the overall group says, but certainly that's a great idea to have that clause on that statement and be able to bill that. Anybody want to add anything to that?
You know, I just think it's looking at that intake, form and making sure that you have all those scenarios covered so that you are capturing that information and authorization and acknowledgement of responsibility. I think that's just really critical so that you have that documentation.
Yep, Joey, I would agree as well.
Awesome, good. Let's see here. What else did we have come in? We got one came in through the Q&A regarding documentation. Do you expect documentation from Epic or referral sources to be scanned into your system so that all staff has access or is scanned in as needed? I certainly think that's important that you get that scanned in as quickly as possible. Anybody want to add anything to that or have a different perspective on it?
Yeah, Joey, I would agree with you. Anytime you're pulling documentation from Epic or anywhere else, if something comes in with a manual fax, you want to make sure all of that documentation is stored in one area. I know for our services, we have an entire audit team. So that audit team cannot go out to Epic and try to find the documentation that you qualified the patient for. So everything needs to be on that patient, inside that patient, whatever the scanning is that you use, to make sure that, if a medical necessity letter comes in from a denial, or you're doing internal audits or an external audit comes in, you want to make sure everything is readily available so you can get it responded to as quickly as possible.
I'll just add in there, I agree with you totally, Amie and Joey. You need to make sure that the information is gathered up front. If you don't, if you wait, good luck getting it right. So it's so important to have it now. So it's available, just like Amie said, for that audit team that's working those claims that come in for an audit. You have to be prepared. I always say, plead your case in court in 2 or 3 years. So the more information you gather up front and put that in that document file management program, it's the better off you are.
Oh, I'm sitting here muted. Absolutely. And a lot of good questions still coming in here. So another one, I just kind of retouch on the software again. We mentioned using the integrated systems with the billing software, but Amie, you also mentioned you guys have a whole separate system, CallFire, that you also kind of use. And I've seen that where providers are finding what you call like a point solution. It's a software that's very specific, does one thing really well, and then sometimes you can even integrate that with your other systems via things like API calls. I've seen a lot of providers use systems like that where, like for instance, you want to kick off a text message, and right now your billing software doesn't really support your ability to send outbound text. You have these third-party solutions, and a lot of providers are using them, that you're able to either go in manually and kick off that text message through something like RingCentral, or even automate that, through some kind of reporting that flows through your, reporting out of your system. But Amie, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
The only thing I would add is the question asked, what software do we use? We actually use CallFire, but there's other softwares that are very good as well. We're actually going to start to use HealthCall for some other options. So those are just two that I'm very familiar with because we use them, but they are automated. So, and like Joey said, it's an API that's built. We know when the order is created inside of the software system, and then that call is going to go out by 3 o'clock that day. So we've kind of got some things built, knowing when to send things out. So that's really all I have to add to that, Joey.
Awesome. Good. Anything else, anybody on the panel before we move on?
Not to that, no, I was going to throw out one of these other questions that was asked.
Yeah.
It's about benchmarking, and it's asking about if there's any benchmarking related to initial discharges of an order. Patient refuses product not provided or returns after patient receives products. What we are tracking within our company, but would like to understand if there's benchmarking information available. I'm not sure if there's benchmarking that specific. I know we have data here at BGM that I can look at, but I don't know if any of you others have any benchmarking information.
I would just say probably by voided orders is the way we would be able to benchmark it. We don't have any standard benchmarking in place to know that, but we, like I said through the video, we keep very good track of our voided orders and why things are voided. So that may lead to us being able to get some pretty good information across our client base. Anyone else?
Great. And Amie, there's another one in here that says, what was the quick qualifier software that you spoke about?
What was the what?
It says, what is the quick qualifier software that Amie spoke about? So I'm not really sure. I wanted to throw that out there though.
I don't know. I think the only software I spoke about was CallFire that we used.
Okay.
And that's for automated calls, but I'm not sure what the question is.
All good. And there's another one that's in here that's good. It says, can you elaborate on any creative ways providers are handling out of network so you do not lose the referral? That's a great question.
The only way I know
What,
is
do you want to jump in there?
The only way I know is subcontracting. So I know we kind of we kind of help our clients that are maybe non-contracted here. We kind of put them in touch with a client that is contracted, and then let them work out the details. But that's really, subcontracting or getting contracted are really the only two ways that I know. I mean, obviously you can have a discussion with that patient and see if they're willing to pay anything, but if you do take their business, but subcontracting is a good opportunity.
I would have to agree with you. I don't think there's a special magic wand out there, so I wish there was. It fix a lot of things.
Absolutely. Ronda, I don't know if you see this one that just came in through the Q&A. It's a little more technical. If the patient failed a CPAP trial, now it's been 9 months, patient wants to restart, do we need to redo the sleep study? Can a home sleep test be done instead due to COVID? If the prescription changes to BiPAP, can the rental restart at month 1? Anything you want to, any feedback you want to share on that one?
Yeah, I was reading that question as well. And if the patient failed the initial trial period, they do have to get requalified. So they do have to go back in to see their doctor and do that repeat sleep study to show that they still need it and to find out any of the etiology that had occurred to figure out why they failed it or failed the compliance. COVID did change some things. So the respiratory policies are still not being enforced at this time. Obviously, you still want to follow the guidelines as they're set in place. You don't want to take advantage of that if you don't have to. But if there's a situation where the patient can't get into the doctor's office and they can't get a sleep study done, certainly you can continue to submit a claim. That's where you append a CR modifier with a claim narrative, with that COVID-19 narrative, so they know that that CR belongs to the COVID pandemic. So you can do it that way as well during this environment. So there's a lot of options there. I'd be more than happy to take that question further when we get to our booths after this, if they want to. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that.
Nope. And I think we're right here at the end of our time. I know we all have booths, each of us here in the exhibit hall. So if you didn't get your question answered, you still want to reach out, please come visit us there or send us a message. We'd all love to interact with you. And certainly, we'll see if we can wrap up, some of these questions as well, and maybe a summary email to follow the event. So anybody, I guess let's open it up to all the presenters. And, I think we have a minute left. Anybody have any last minute thoughts before we end the call and hand it back to Sarah?
I just think it was great to do this. I appreciate MAMES inviting us to do this panel virtually. So we had to be creative and come up with a way to do it virtually versus in person. But we hope to see everybody soon because the in-person is great to do that networking. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys. See you at the bar later.
Thank you so much. Exactly. Drinks on John.
Yes, as always.
You guys were amazing. For me, it was, speaking a different language. And I know there's many people who understand this language very well. So thank you for clarifying and thank you for getting those questions answered. And you guys, Joey did mention everyone on our panel today does have a booth. So please head to the exhibit hall this afternoon when we have open exhibit hall time and make sure to connect with them and get those questions answered. I know we had a limited amount of time there. So we just want to go back and thank our sponsors for this program today in Allegiance Group, AccuServe, ProChant, and VGM. I know you want to find out more on the back end processes as well. So join us for part 2 of this panel discussion tomorrow afternoon. And
there we go.
I don't know who that guy was, but I think I'm in the wrong room. So we'll catch up on that tomorrow afternoon. As for what's next, when we close this room, you will see the session survey pop up to provide us with your valuable feedback. So please be sure to take that right away. Next up for day 2, we'll come back in a few minutes here with Ty Bello to set the stage, speaking plain to the referral community during a pandemic. So this will be followed, as I mentioned, by the open exhibit hall, where we are encouraging you to take this second opportunity to truly engage with our incredible exhibitors, watch their videos, check out their information in their booths, strike up a great conversation, and support those who support us. We will also be announcing some super fun things with our exhibitor hall during our second session. So go take that quick stretch break, chat at your new friends in the networking lounge from across the country, and we will see you at 10:45 Central Standard Time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.